She begged to scrub toilets just to save her dying 5-year-old. But when a ruthless billionaire spots her child's dropped crayon drawing on his pristine marble floor, a buried ghost is resurrected, and a toxic, multi-billion-dollar empire is about to be violently brought to its knees. The soliloquy of fate and the desperate depths of a single mother imagine standing on the precipice of absolute ruin, watching the only light in your universe slowly flicker and fade out. You are told there is a literal price tag on a human soul, on the fading breath of a 5-year-old child, and it is a sum so astronomically cruel that it shatters your mind just to calculate it. What would you surrender to buy one more heartbeat? Your pride? Your future? Your very identity? There are fractions of a second in the grand, violent tapestry of human existence where fate stops playing with mere threads and instead yanks the entire fabric of reality out from under our feet. Today, a single piece of cheap, crumpled construction paper, slipping from trembling, frostbitten fingers, is about to bring a multi-billion-dollar empire to its knees, resurrect a ghost from the grave, and exact a terrifying vengeance upon those who believe wealth makes them gods. Billionaire Bliss Audio warmly welcomes you to a journey of unimaginable sacrifice, buried secrets, and the fierce, roaring power of a mother's love. If you find yourself captivated by stories where the darkest storms give way to the most miraculous dawns, please hit that subscribe button to support our channel and give us the motivation to continue bringing you profoundly moving, life-altering stories like this one. Now, hold your breath and step with us into the freezing winds of Manhattan, where destiny is quietly waiting to strike. For 28-year-old Miranda, the concept of destiny was a luxury she could no longer afford. Survival was the only currency she traded in. On this bitterly cold Tuesday morning, she stood on the bustling, unforgiving sidewalk of the financial district, her neck craning upward to take in the monolithic glass and steel structure of the Meridian Corporation. The skyscraper pierced the overcast sky like a glittering, impenetrable spear, a colossal monument to corporate supremacy, untouchable arrogance, and unimaginable wealth. Reflected in the pristine, spotless glass of the ground floor was Miranda's stark, painful reality. She possessed a dangerously thin frame, hollowed cheeks that whispered of chronic, agonizing sleep deprivation, and a faded navy blue blazer that was at least 2 seasons out of date and 1 size too large. She did not belong in this world. The men and women flowing seamlessly past her through the revolving doors were heavily armored in tailored Italian wool, exuding the rich, earthy scent of expensive espresso and the quiet confidence of those who rule the earth. Miranda, by devastating contrast, smelled of cheap, generic laundry detergent and the sterile, terrifying, chemical scent of hospital waiting rooms. Her life over the past year had been a masterclass in silent endurance. Her 5-year-old son, Jamie, was the absolute center of her universe, the solitary, beating source of warmth in a world that had grown exceedingly, terrifyingly cold. But Jamie was fighting a brutal war inside his own tiny, fragile body. Diagnosed 12 months ago with a rare, highly aggressive blood disorder, his precious childhood days were no longer measured in playground games or laughter, but in agonizing treatments, sterile needles, and an overwhelming, heavy lethargy that was slowly stealing the bright light from his beautiful eyes. The medical bills were not just mounting. They were a suffocating avalanche that had long since buried her modest savings, her few assets, and whatever remained of her peace of mind. Every red-stamped past-due notice shoved into her mailbox felt like a physical, breathless blow to her chest. She was a woman armed with a brilliant college degree, a sharp, analytical mind, and a relentless work ethic. But the harsh reality of corporate America is that when you are a single mother whose child requires sudden, terrifying hospital dashes in the middle of the day, traditional careers evaporate like mist. Employers will offer shallow sympathy, but they rarely offer the extreme flexibility required to keep a dying child breathing. Thus, Miranda had sacrificed everything. She had traded her pride, her hard-earned career aspirations, and her ego for the singular, desperate goal of keeping Jamie alive. That profound sacrifice had brought her to the towering, imposing doors of Meridian. She was not here to submit her resume for the managerial positions her mind was perfectly qualified for. She was here clutching an application for a night shift janitorial position. The reasoning was brutally simple and completely heartbreaking. Meridian paid its overnight maintenance staff a premium rate, double the industry standard, and far more importantly, it offered a comprehensive, ironclad union health insurance plan beginning on day one. To Miranda, that plastic insurance card was a literal shield for her son, a holy grail that could fully cover the bone marrow transplant Jamie desperately needed to survive. She would gladly scrub the marble floors of indifferent billionaires on her hands and knees until her knuckles bled and her spine ached, if it meant her little boy could live to see his 6th birthday. Inside the worn, water-stained manila folder she clutched tightly to her chest, hidden safely beneath her resume and the standard application forms, lay her most prized worldly possession. It was not a glowing letter of recommendation or a framed certificate of academic achievement. It was a piece of cheap construction paper, slightly crumpled at the edges, bearing a simple, chaotic crayon drawing. The image was an explosion of vibrant, uncoordinated colors representing a stick figure mother firmly holding the hand of a smaller stick figure boy beneath a massive, lopsided yellow sun. At the bottom of the page, written in the shaky, uneven block letters of a kindergarten student, were the words that kept her heart beating. To Mommy. From Jamie Harrington. It was her talisman. It was her sacred amulet against the crushing, suffocating weight of the world. Whenever the sheer exhaustion threatened to shatter her mind, whenever the hunger pangs grew too sharp to ignore, she would look at that piece of paper and remember exactly why she could never, ever allow herself to give up. Taking a deep, shuddering breath of the freezing city air, Miranda tightened her numb fingers around the folder, squared her thin, trembling shoulders, and walked forward through the revolving doors into the lion's den, completely unaware that the invisible, heavy hand of destiny was already reaching out to intervene, preparing to alter the course of her life forever. The collision of worlds and the fallen talisman as she stepped into the echoing, marble-clad expanse of the Meridian lobby, the fragile thread holding her desperate world together finally snapped. The sheer scale of the building's interior was designed to intimidate, a sprawling cavern of polished stone and blinding geometric light fixtures that made a person feel instantly insignificant, like a speck of dust trespassing in a cathedral of commerce. Miranda's worn shoes squeaked faintly against the pristine floor, a glaringly obvious sound that drew the sharp, judgmental eyes of passing executives. Overwhelmed by the sensory assault of wealth and her own crippling exhaustion, her numb, frostbitten fingers betrayed her. The manila folder slipped from her grasp, hitting the floor with a pathetic slap. Papers scattered like dead leaves in a sudden gust of wind. Her meticulously filled-out application for the night shift janitorial role sliding across the marble, but it was the colorful piece of construction paper that caught the merciless draft of the revolving doors. It fluttered away, a vibrant, chaotic splash of crayon skipping across the cold, gray floor, right into the path of a rapidly approaching entourage. At the center of that entourage was Alexander Harrington, the CEO of Meridian Corporation, a man whose reputation for ruthless efficiency was rivaled only by his striking, aristocratic coldness. He moved through the lobby like a shark cutting through deep water, his bespoke charcoal suit acting as armor, his sharp, angular features set in a mask of perpetual, terrifying indifference. Assistants and vice presidents scrambled to keep pace with his long, predatory strides, feeding him numbers and market projections that dictated the fates of thousands. He was a man who noticed nothing beneath his eye line, a billionaire who believed he had long ago conquered the unpredictable variables of fate. Yet, as his expensive leather shoe descended toward the marble, his gaze caught a violent splash of yellow and red. Driven by an instinct he could not name, a sudden, inexplicable tightening in his chest, Alexander halted. The entire entourage froze behind him in terrified synchronization. He reached down, his manicured fingers brushing the cold stone, and picked up the crumpled drawing. For a man who dealt exclusively in global acquisitions and hostile takeovers, the crude crayon stick figures should have meant absolutely nothing. But as his dark eyes scanned the uneven, shaky block letters at the bottom of the page, the breath was punched violently from his lungs. To Mommy. From Jamie Harrington. The universe seemed to grind to a violently sudden halt. The ambient noise of the bustling lobby, the clicking heels, the hushed corporate murmurs, the ringing phones, faded into a dull, distant roar in Alexander's ears. Harrington. It was a common enough name, but the visceral, electric shock tearing through his veins told him this was no coincidence. His mind violently hurled him 3 years into the past, to the bitter, screaming match in the penthouse that had ended, with his older brother, David, walking out of the Meridian Empire forever. David had chosen a pregnant, fiercely intelligent woman from the wrong side of the tracks over the family's toxic dynasty. The family patriarch had erased David from their history, cutting off his inheritance and his medical trust. When David died a year later in a tragic, senseless car accident, Alexander had been told the child had not survived either. He had been lied to. Slowly, agonizingly, Alexander raised his head, his eyes tracking the trajectory of the fallen papers until they landed on the woman kneeling desperately on the floor, scrambling to gather her scattered life. He saw the faded navy blazer. He saw the brutal, hollow exhaustion carved into her cheekbones. But mostly, he saw the undeniable, defiant spark in her eyes that had driven his brother to abandon billions. This was Miranda. The ghost his family had buried alive had just walked through his front doors, clutching an application for a scrub brush and a mop, desperately trying to buy the life of the Harrington heir with the sweat of her brow. The drawing in his hand felt suddenly heavier than a mountain, radiating the unimaginable suffering of a dying child and the monstrous, unforgiving cruelty of his own bloodline. Alexander's impeccably structured world was disintegrating in real time, fracturing under the weight of a 5-year-old's crayon signature. Part 3. The Ghost Resurrected and the Fierce Inquisition. Word count, 785. The silence that followed the billionaire's whispered realization was heavy enough to crush the air from Miranda's lungs. Alexander did not hand the drawing back to her. Instead, he dismissed his trailing entourage with a single, sharp flick of his wrist, a gesture so loaded with absolute authority that the crowd of executives vanished into the periphery without a single word of protest. He stepped forward, towering over Miranda as she clutched her gathered papers to her chest, her heart hammering a frantic, terrifying rhythm against her ribs. When he finally spoke, his voice was not the booming roar of a corporate titan, but a fractured, gravelly whisper that seemed to echo from the deepest, darkest trenches of his soul. "My office," he commanded, his eyes locked onto hers with a terrifying intensity. Now, it was not a request. It was the gravitational pull of destiny dragging her upward. The private elevator ride to the penthouse was a suffocating descent into the past Miranda had fought so desperately to escape. She stood rigidly in the corner of the mirrored cab, acutely aware of how aggressively out of place she looked next to Alexander's immaculate presence. She had never met David's younger brother, but she recognized the Harrington features instantly, the sharp jawline, the piercing eyes, the arrogant posture. They were the very same features she saw every single day in the pale, tired face of her dying son. When the doors finally parted, revealing an office that looked more like the bridge of a starship, featuring floor-to-ceiling glass that offered a god's-eye view of Manhattan, Miranda refused to shrink. She was standing in the belly of the beast that had chewed up her husband and spat him out, and she would not let them devour her son. Alexander stood behind his massive oak desk, the crayon drawing placed gently, almost reverently, on the polished wood. "David's child," he said, the words cutting through the sterile air like a scalpel. "You let me believe he was dead. You let this entire family believe my nephew was a ghost." The accusation ignited a dormant, explosive fury within Miranda. The exhaustion that had weighed her down for 12 agonizing months instantly vaporized, replaced by the roaring, fierce fire of a mother cornered by a predator. "Do not dare put this on me," she fired back, her voice shaking with a rage so profound it rattled the thick glass of the office windows. "Your father threatened to drag me through the courts until I was utterly bankrupt. He told me, to my face, that a Harrington heir would not be raised by a penniless nobody, and that he would take Jamie from my arms and ensure I never saw him again. I didn't hide from you because I was vindictive, Alexander. I hid because I was terrified. I hid to keep my son safe from the poison that runs through the veins of this company." She stepped closer to the desk, slamming her palms down onto the wood, forcing the billionaire to look her directly in the eyes. "And now," she continued, her voice breaking, the tears of unimaginable stress finally breaching her defenses. That same toxic wealth is the only thing that can save him. Jamie has aggressive leukemia. The treatments have drained everything I have. I came here today to scrub your toilets, to clean the filth off your marble floors on my hands and knees, just to get the union health insurance so my little boy can have a bone marrow transplant. So do not stand there in your $5,000 suit and judge me. I am fighting a war you cannot even begin to comprehend. Alexander stared at her, utterly paralyzed. The sheer, devastating gravity of her words struck him with the force of a physical blow. His empire, his billions, his relentless pursuit of market dominance. It all crumbled into meaningless ash in the face of this woman's staggering sacrifice. He looked from Miranda's tear-streaked face to the crude drawing of the yellow sun on his desk. His brother's widow was begging for a mop, while the Harrington legacy sat on mountains of hoarded gold. A profound, sickening wave of shame washed over him, followed immediately by an awakening so violent it fundamentally rewired his soul. The ghost of his brother was standing in the room, demanding a reckoning, and Alexander knew in that singular, defining heartbeat that the rules of his universe had permanently changed. The vengeance of destiny and the boardroom reckoning confronted with the devastating consequences of his family's ruthless legacy, Alexander made a choice that would violently fracture the foundation of the Meridian Empire. He did not simply offer Miranda a check. Writing a check was a coward's way out, a sterile transaction that would not balance the cosmic scales of justice. He needed to tear the sickness out by the root. Within an hour, an emergency board meeting was violently convened. The massive mahogany table was surrounded by the old guard, the gray-haired, cold-blooded power players who had sat beside Alexander's late father, the very men who had gleefully engineered David's financial exile and terrorized a grieving, pregnant Miranda. They murmured in annoyed confusion as Alexander entered the room, but the murmurs died instantly when Miranda walked in right behind him, still wearing her faded, oversized navy blazer, her chin held high with the terrifying courage of a woman who had absolutely nothing left to lose. "Gentlemen," Alexander began, his voice echoing with a dark, dangerous calm that sent a collective shiver down the spines of the men in the room. He did not sit. He paced the length of the table like a predator evaluating its prey. For decades, this corporation has operated on the delusion that our wealth elevates us above the basic laws of human decency. We have measured our worth in quarterly margins and hostile takeovers, willfully ignoring the bodies we stepped on to reach this skyline. 3 years ago, you sat in this very room and voted to legally sever my brother David from his own legacy. You condemned his widow and his unborn child to a life of poverty because you deemed her unsuitable for our brand. He slammed his fist onto the table, the sudden, violent sound making several board members flinch. That unsuitable woman just walked into my lobby begging for a janitorial position so she could get the health insurance required to save my nephew's life. Chaos immediately erupted. The chairman of the board, a withered, arrogant man named Vance, stood up, his face purple with indignation. "Alexander, this is outrageous. The terms of the family trust were settled legally. You cannot bring this external drama into a corporate board meeting. Meridian resources cannot be funneled into personal, illegitimate ventures." The smile that spread across Alexander's face was devoid of any warmth. It was a promise of absolute destruction. This was the terrifying vengeance of destiny unfolding in real time. "You misunderstand me, Vance," Alexander whispered, leaning over the table. "I am not asking for your permission to use corporate resources. I am informing you that as of this exact second, I am dismantling the Harrington Family Trust. Furthermore, I have instructed my legal team to initiate an immediate audit of the severance packages and backchannel deals you all made when my father was dying. I am burning this toxic structure to the ground, and I am building it back up in the name of the child you tried to erase." He turned his gaze to the rest of the panicked, pale faces in the room. Any man who objects to full, unmitigated financial restitution for Miranda and Jamie Harrington will find themselves facing not only termination, but the total, uncompromising wrath of my personal legal team. I will hunt your portfolios down to the last penny, and I will leave you scrubbing the floors of this city just to feed your families. Miranda watched in stunned, breathless silence as the multi-billion-dollar empire was brought to its knees. The arrogant gods of corporate America were shrinking in their custom-tailored suits, paralyzed by the realization that their money could not protect them from the monstrous karma they had cultivated. Alexander had weaponized the very ruthlessness he was famous for, but for the first time in his life, he was wielding it not for profit, but for righteous, uncompromising love. As Vance slumped back into his leather chair, utterly defeated, Alexander walked back to Miranda. He gently placed a hand on her trembling shoulder, looking at her not as a subordinate, and certainly not as a beggar, but as the true, undisputed matriarch of a resurrected family line. The corporate war was over before it had even truly begun, won by the sheer, undeniable gravity of a mother's sacrifice. The miraculous dawn beyond the Tower of Glass, with the ashes of the old Meridian Empire still settling. The battlefield shifted from the sterile corporate boardroom to the agonizingly bright lights of the pediatric oncology ward. All the money in the world, the billions of dollars Alexander had violently reclaimed, could buy the best doctors, the most advanced treatments, and an entire private floor at Manhattan's premier hospital, but it could not guarantee a miracle. Biology, unlike corporate boards, could not be bullied into submission. When the frantic testing revealed that Alexander was not just a relative, but a perfect, one-in-a-million bone marrow match for little Jamie, Miranda finally fell to her knees in the hospital hallway and wept. They were not tears of exhaustion, but the explosive, shattering release of a dam that had held back a year's worth of unimaginable terror. Destiny, having orchestrated this violent collision of their worlds, was finally extending a hand of absolute grace. The day of the transplant, the freezing winds of the city raged outside the heavy hospital windows, but inside Jamie's room, a profound, sacred warmth had taken hold. Alexander, dressed in a standard hospital gown that stripped away the last vestiges of his intimidating corporate armor, lay in the bed next to his nephew. For the first time, he saw the undeniable echo of his brother David in the boy's fragile, pale face. As the machines hummed softly, transferring the life-saving marrow from uncle to nephew, Miranda sat between the two beds. She held Jamie's tiny, bruising hand in her left hand, and, in a gesture that silently healed a fractured family tree, she held Alexander's large, calloused hand in her right. The billionaire, who had spent his entire life building impenetrable walls around his heart, felt a single tear slip down his cheek. In surrendering a part of his own body to save this boy, Alexander realized he was the one who was truly being rescued. Weeks turned into months, and the agonizingly slow march of medical recovery gradually gave way to the miraculous dawn they had fought so fiercely to witness. The lethargy that had stolen Jamie's childhood slowly evaporated. The color returned to his cheeks, and the hollow echoes of the hospital room were finally replaced by the glorious, chaotic sound of a 5-year-old's laughter. When Jamie was officially declared in remission, the celebration did not take place in a cold, marble lobby or a sterile penthouse. It happened in a bright, sunlit park, with Jamie running wildly across the grass, chasing a balloon into the boundless sky. Miranda watched her son from a nearby bench, wrapping her tailored, warm cashmere coat tighter around herself. The oversized navy blazer was gone, a relic of a nightmare she had survived. She had not returned to Meridian as a janitor, nor had she simply accepted the role of a wealthy, idle widow. Empowered by Alexander, who had radically transformed the company's mission, Miranda was now running the newly established Harrington Foundation, channeling billions of dollars into pediatric cancer research and providing unyielding support for single mothers facing the exact terrifying abyss she had crawled out of. She had taken the worst of her suffering and forged it into a beacon of hope for thousands of others. Alexander walked up behind her, handing her a steaming cup of expensive espresso. He watched Jamie tumble onto the grass, laughing hysterically, and smiled, a genuine, warm expression that still felt slightly unfamiliar on his face. "He looks just like David when he smiles," Alexander murmured, his voice thick with a healing grief. Miranda leaned against him, feeling the solid, grounding presence of the family she had fought so desperately to protect. The journey had stripped her to the bone, demanding every ounce of her pride, her identity, and her soul. But looking at her son, alive and practically vibrating with energy beneath the massive, golden sun. She knew she would walk through the fire 1,000 times over to buy him that heartbeat. In the grand, violent tapestry of human existence, fate had tried to break her, but it had vastly underestimated the fierce, roaring power of a mother's love. A single piece of cheap, crumpled construction paper had rewritten the destiny of an empire, proving once and for all that the brightest, most miraculous dawns are only ever born from the courage to face the darkest, most terrifying storms. The story of Miranda, Alexander, and little Jamie serves as a powerful testament to the unstoppable force of a mother's love and the profound capacity for human redemption. What began as a desperate, humiliating attempt to secure a menial job for survival transformed into a cosmic reckoning that shattered a toxic billionaire empire. A simple, vibrant crayon drawing dropped on a cold marble floor was enough to pierce the armor of a ruthless corporate titan, forcing him to confront the dark, cruel legacy of his own bloodline. This narrative brilliantly captures the stark contrast between the hollow pursuit of unimaginable wealth and the raw, visceral fight for human life. Alexander's dramatic transformation from a cold, calculating CEO to a fiercely protective uncle willing to burn his own boardroom to the ground illustrates that true power does not lie in market dominance or hoarded gold. Instead, it lies in the courage to right past wrongs and use one's privilege to heal rather than destroy. Miranda's harrowing journey from a desperate widow begging for a scrub brush to the empowered matriarch leading a billion-dollar charitable foundation is a magnificent tribute to human resilience. It reminds us that fate, no matter how cruel or intimidating, can be entirely rewritten by a single act of immense sacrifice. In the end, the broken Harrington family was not saved by their billions, but by the miraculous, unifying grace of shared humanity, proving that the deepest scars can be healed when love becomes the ultimate currency. The profound lesson: true wealth and legacy are not defined by material accumulation, corporate titles, or ruthless efficiency, but by our deep connection to others and our willingness to protect the vulnerable. Empathy and moral courage possess the absolute power to dismantle the most entrenched, toxic systems, reminding us that no amount of worldly success can ever outweigh the value of a human life and genuine family loyalty. How to apply this to your current life? Take a step back and examine the empires or routines you are building. Are you sacrificing human connection, family relationships, or your own moral compass in the relentless pursuit of financial success or career advancement? Challenge yourself to redefine what winning looks like. Use whatever resources, influence, or time you possess to uplift those who are struggling around you. Have the courage to stand up against unfairness or toxicity in your workplace or community, even if it means challenging the status quo and risking your own comfort. Most importantly, be fiercely present for your loved ones, and never underestimate the monumental, life-altering impact of a single act of empathy or forgiveness. If you were in Alexander's position, would you have the courage to risk your own hard-earned success and status to right a past wrong for your family? Please share your thoughts and perspectives in the comments section below so we can all learn from one another. If you enjoyed this story and found value in its message, please hit that subscribe button. Your support gives us the incredible motivation to keep creating and bringing you more engaging, meaningful content in the future.